So this is the Chapter 5, Segment 3 outline, and this is the beginning part is a continuation of the previous section, which is titled Proper Emotional and Social Development Requires a Warm, Interactive Adult. So in the previous section, just to continue and make sure that it's kind of a cohesive transition, the book talks about temperament, and that is a person's emotional makeup and the way the person generally responds to a variety of situations. So in the book, they talk about babies and how they act towards people around them and in their environment, and one of the topics the book talks about is stranger anxiety, which is the negative response of infants towards unfamiliar people, which I'm sure we are all aware of. Babies being upset when they are perhaps handed off to a family member or somebody they are not sure of, and that the negative response that comes with it. And another topic is imprinting. So this is the behavior by which birds are predisposed to follow any moving object that they see shortly after hatching. And it's a little ad nauseum, but it's prominent in bird species, and this is common in the book provides an example of whooping cranes and how they painted a ultralight aircraft to reflect what a mother whooping crane would look like, and they imprinted the chicks to see the plane so that when it was time for the birds to move from the area, they would follow the aircraft, even though it wasn't their actual mother. The next section is titled Scientists Study Love and Attachment, and the most famous scientist, and the one the book focuses on the most, is Harry Harlow, and he was an American psychologist who demonstrated the drive that newborn rhesus monkeys have to recognize and stay close to a mother figure. And this is a very famous experiment. He separated newborn monkeys from their mothers, and their nourishment was provided by bottles that were placed in cloth-covered models of a monkey mother, and this is how they were fed and given nutrients. And the Harlow found that the babies would cling to the model not just when eating, but also in between meals, and that they found comfort in clinging to this cloth-covered model. And there was a development of preference in a model, and they usually preferred models that offered nourishment in the form of a baby bottle that usually had some type of face on them. Whether it was a rudimentary face, they still preferred mothers that had a face. And even if given the choice between a model that was made of just wire but had the feeding versus a mother model that had the cloth-covered models that the babies could cling on to, they preferred the cloth-covered model. So there was a enormous effect of having no mother as the baby rhesus monkeys developed and grew up. And they found that the interactions with other monkeys was basically non-existent. They didn't know how to interact with their peers, others of their species, which made it basically hopeless that they could form any sexual relationships and reproduce. And even other monkeys would attack the monkeys that had been raised with no mother. And what's actually fascinating is that much of the damage caused by not being raised by a real mother could have easily been avoided by raising the monkeys with peers, other monkeys their own age. And it's found that abused children might benefit from interaction with other supportively parented children. Now, obviously, this experiment came with some controversy because of the obvious stress that it put the young monkeys in and what they experienced, but it changed an early notion of how parents should deal with their children. And this transitions into infant attachment. And the next psychologist that we talk about is John Bowlby. So he paid attention to Harlow's results, and he was a prominent child psychologist in London. And experts at the time in hospitals believed that it was important for parents to leave quickly and to visit rarely, if at all, their children in the hospital. And this was supposed to help the children, quote unquote, settle in, and in effect be less trouble to the hospital staff. But Bowlby thought that the children who had settled in were in fact depressed because they were deprived of warm interaction with their parents. So Bowlby studied attachment, which is a strong emotional bond or tie between the infant and caregivers. So there's the famous strange situation experiment, which is a test of attachment as revealed by child's reaction to a temporary separation from the caregiver. And how this experiment is conducted is the infant or child is brought by a parent, usually the mother, to a laboratory room filled with toys and an unfamiliar person, which is an experimenter. The parent first leaves the child with a stranger for 3 minutes, then returns to be alone with the child in the room for 3 minutes, leaves the child again, either alone or with a stranger, and finally the parent and child are reunited. And what they found is that there are many different styles of attachment. So the first style of attachment is secure attachment, and it's when the child is visibly upset when the caregiver leaves, they reject, they do not want to interact with the stranger, and openly welcomes reunion with their caregiver. The next attachment style is avoidant. So this is when the child shows little or no distress when the caregiver leaves, shows little or no response upon reunion, and interacts very little with a stranger. And so it seems that the child basically has no preference, is kind of just doing their own thing. There's ambivalent attachment. So this is when the child is upset when the caregiver leaves and may warm up to a stranger and then behaves negatively toward the caregiver upon reuniting. And this is also called resistant attachment. And the last style of attachment is when the child shows an inconsistent pattern of response in the strange situation. And what they found is that the baby's response to the stranger situation, or the attachment style they showcase, also correlates with the parent's behavior, or specifically his or her parenting style. So, for example, secure attachment pattern often correlated with appropriate parenting style, which accompanied with prompt response and consistent with needs. Avoidant attachment was correlated with a parenting style of little or no response to a distressed child, discouraging crying, and encouraging independence, and perhaps to the point of neglect. Ambivalent attachment was correlated with the parenting style of inconsistent between appropriate and neglectful responses, so somewhere in between the secure and avoidant attachment. And then disorganized attachment was correlated to a frightened and frightening withdrawn, negative, confused, poor at reading infants' emotions type of parenting style. So that is the last part of the book that talks about early development. And the book talks about, as it did in the beginning, Jeannie and Victor, who is a wild boy of Averon, and they talk about whether their behavioral issues were due to their parenting style in a review, and that is the end of early development. And so the next portion of the chapter goes into adolescence, and it's all about developing identity. So the first thing and main thing is puberty, which is the landmark event when an individual becomes capable of reproducing. And then overall, adolescence is defined as the process of transition from childhood to adulthood. So, adolescence is marked by physical changes that prepare boys and girls for adulthood. So there's obviously, with puberty, there is many changes in body size, different body growth, and this is, in the context of adolescent development, regulated and driven by hormones. So hormones are chemicals released from one part of the body that enter the bloodstream and affect other parts of the body. And in the context of adolescent development, gonadal hormones such as estrogens and testosterone drive sexual development. And hormones drive the development of secondary sex characteristics, which are physical characteristics that are typically indicators of adults of one sex or the other. And in girls, this usually includes wide hips, soft skin, and breast development that are promoted by estrogens. And in boys, this includes muscle growth, change in facial hair, including a wider jaw and thicker brow, and beard growth that is prompted by testosterone. So, one of the landmarks in a girl's puberty or adolescence development is the menarche, which is the time at which a girl has her first menstrual period. And surprisingly enough, there's a lot of research listed here that over the past century, the age at which girls reach menarche has declined. So in modern times, girls are getting their periods earlier and earlier. So in the modern day United States, African American girls tend to reach menarche at an earlier age than Caucasian girls. And they believe that, well, scientists believe that racial differences could be due to differences in stress during childhood, since childhood stress has been correlated to lead to an earlier menarche, as well as there's a possible effect of whether or not a girl has a father figure in her early childhood and the age at which she will get her first period. And sleep patterns also change during adolescence. So their body clocks start to shift, and so naturally they stay up later and sleep in later as well. Even though this is something that is seen in all teenagers, schools still do not change school time starts, even though this is a noted difference in teenagers. And in most cases, most teenagers have to go to school in the morning, and a few school districts shift to later classes for high school. So the last big topic is adolescence can be a confusing and troubling time. And interesting enough, changes in the body and legal status during adolescence present teenagers with even greater independence and control. And most adolescents never commit a crime, engage in risky sex, or have a major accident, but a person is more likely to engage in such behaviors during adolescence than at any other time in their life.